So I'd like to introduce Anca. Anca Szilagyi grew up in Brooklyn, New York. Her work has appeared in the Massachusetts Review, Western Humanities Review, the Antigonus Review, and on the Plowshares blog. She holds an MFA from the University of Washington. She reads Proust in the original French. And I'm going to hand it over to her.
Hi. Can everyone hear me okay? Yep. Hello to everyone out there as well. So, my story is called More Like Home Than Home. The sleeves of her grandmother's overcoat dangled low in the honeyed sunlight, a fuzzed cuff brushing the little girl's knuckles. Hand in hand, they went down Beverly Road toward ABC, the bodega on the avenue. Here and there, the girl gave a little hop, and the grandmother strode with erect carriage, steady and constant. Mike, the grocer, would give the girl a caramel for being good. She loved a cube of caramel, would try not to devour it, but let it dissolve on her tongue. Pink and black spots, flattened bubble gum, new and old, dotted the pebbly concrete. The girl counted them. You couldn't get much at the grocer's. A box of chicken bouillon cubes, a bunch of carrots. That was all the grandmother needed for the girl's lunch. Supa shimorkov.
1. Pronounce the A with brev, like the E in other. Pronounce the S with comma, like the sh in show.
The grocer smiled at the girl and her grandmother from behind the plexiglass window. He rang them up and put the change through the divot in the counter, along with the caramel wrapped in clear plastic. You had to remove the thin plastic carefully, as strips of it often stuck to the caramel. The grandmother heaved up the girl so she could wave goodbye. Bye-bye, said the grocer, voice muffled behind the window. The mid-morning sun warmed their faces. Coney Island Avenue stretched southward as far as they could see. Beyond the vanishing point, there was the beach and Astroland, cotton candy and a gentle roller coaster shaped like a worm boring through an apple. Several blocks north bloomed Prospect Park, where the girl had fallen into a frozen pond. And across from ABC was the dance studio, Gotta Dance, where she pointed and flexed her toes and sang I Am a Little Teapot. She didn't know who Gotta was. It was autumn. The sky was a reassuring blue, the air crisp. The girl's brother had started all-day school. They couldn't play together as much. He had homework, lining up numbers in wobbly columns down notebook pages, connecting dots to form alphabets. The grandmother maneuvered around a splat of broken glass, wrapping the girl's hand in her own. The girl liked the feel of her grandmother's hand, warm and wrinkly. Turning back on Beverly, the grandmother stopped and clucked her tongue. In the sun upon the curb shined a pair of red dancing shoes. Such nice shoes, her grandmother crooned. She knelt to admire them. A wine-dark red, a black plum flesh red, patent leather, with straps at the ankles and sturdy heels. Faintly, oh so very faintly, the red shoes sparkled. She scooped up the shoes with her free hand, a grocery bag dangling in the crook of her arm. The tan soles showed no scuffs. Who would throw these out, like new? The grandmother descended into a mumble, low and whispery, as she was wont to do. Red dancing shoes in one hand, the girl's hand in the other, the grandmother pushed on, not long, until they climbed the creaky carpeted stairs of the three-family house. The girl slurped at the soup, flecked with dill. The grandmother sent her to her nap. The girl lay in her parents' bed where she liked to sleep, but she did not want to nap. She felt awake, too old to nap. She stared at the fabric wall hanging above the bed, big squares of scratchy oatmeal and silky field brown and velvety orange gold, vast farmlands over which she soared. The bedroom door was open a crack. In the hallway crept her grandmother, lightly gliding on the dancing shoes. 1 step, 2 steps, light and quick, between the living room and the kitchen. The girl rolled onto her belly. Grandma? The grandmother poked her head into the bedroom. She had a high forehead, an olive skin that seemed now a pleasant yellow, now a pleasantly faint green, now the flush of particular mysterious emotions, a light eggplant. A few dark spots dappled at her widow's peak. A vein snaked among the spots. Her glasses slipped down her nose. What, Papusha?
2. Doll. Other terms of endearment: puishor, chiclet, yepurash, bunny. A yepurash eats morkov. Now the girl's favorite book was The Little Rabbit, a cute white yepwarash with a fluffy tail and a pink nose that hopped among a field of buttercups. One day, she would read about another yepwarash, which another little girl would follow down a rabbit hole.
What are you doing? The grandmother let out a small, croaking chuckle. Nothing, nothing, go to sleep. She shut the bedroom door, but the girl heard her gliding steps up and down the hallway. The girl's father brought home translucent orange squares. Lucite. He rained them down on the low table in the middle of the children's room. When he brought the girl to his office on the grandmother or babysitter's day off, he gave her a book of carpet samples to play with. She'd leaf through it, fingering the various textures lackadaisically. But these shiny chips were much better. She raked them up with sticky palms and let them rain down again. They could be buttons. She and her brother would construct a machine. They would use the machine as a force field against the aliens and the ninja.
3. The girl liked to say that every Friday night, after she went to sleep, Elroy Jetson would pick her up in his flying saucer.
Both were invisible, but the ninja, particularly ubiquitous, could strike at any moment. So said her brother, brown eyes glittering and eyebrows up as far as they would go, as he leaned on the windowsill and searched the tree branches and the night sky.
4. This, the girl eventually learned, was her brother's tricking face.
Sometimes her mother worked late, sometimes her father, sometimes both. When one parent returned, the grandmother could go home to the grandfather, who also returned home from work. Munca meant work.
5. See also lucru. Notice the similarity of lucru to lucrative. The girls' grandmothers both used Latinate words in English, adding a certain elegance to their speech.
It was a word that floated round and round in the house, sacred and solemn. The grandmother was now putting on her wool sweater vest and fastening her scarf. The adults were talking in the hall, and the girl piled squares of orange lucite upon one another, building a terrifying tower. Her brother spurned the lucite for Legos and said the girl couldn't build a proper Lego spaceship and karate chopped her precarious tower. The girl howled. "Children," said the grandmother from the hall. Then came the happy sound of the bolt unlocking. The mother also returned home. The girl left the toppled pile. The mother wore a leather jacket and an ankle-length skirt and navy blue tennis shoes. The mother had a particular smell about her when she returned from work. It would wear off sometime after dinner, but it was here now, some mixture of double-mint gum and nickels.
6. The mother chewed gum to stay alert at the office. In 1984, double-mint gum cost 15 cents. The double-mint twins, two healthy blondes on a tandem bicycle, were not originally permitted to chew gum on television, as this exhibited a lack of decorum, a prohibition which the grandmother would surely have approved. Things changed, however, in the 1980s.
Her mother worked at a bank, and the girl guessed the nickel smell must be a result of being surrounded by bars of gold and coins. She hugged her mother's knees. Outside it was cold. Her mother's round cheeks flushed. She put a cold, soft hand on the girl's head, and the girl nuzzled further into her skirt. "Mama," said her mother to her grandmother, "are those new shoes?" The grandmother grinned, sly. "What do you know about the foxtrot?" she asked. The girl's mother, fumbling in her purse, didn't answer. The two women seemed very tall and curvaceous and in some ways identical, pear-shaped with small waists around which their husbands crept loving arms. The mother paid the grandmother for her babysitting. The grandmother winked at the girl.
7. It was a secret savings account she was accumulating, secret from her mother, not that the girl knew this. The money would one day be returned to the parents when it was time to buy a house.
"We used to dance and dance by the Black Sea," the grandmother said, closing the door behind her. The girl thought she heard her grandmother tittering as she clucked down the stairs. It was like a fairy tale, foxtrots, red shoes, the Black Sea. Her grandmother had many cousins, 12 dancing princesses. They lived far away in Israel.
8. Reasons for immigration to Israel are complicated and fraught with emotion. The girl's parents may well have settled there instead. It was easier to do so since the Israeli government paid the Romanian government for immigrants. Everything changed at the last minute with a visa from a pushy older relative, a great-grandmother whose finesse at bureaucratic maneuvering got her to the U.S. as early as 1968, as soon as its doors reopened to immigration. The neighbors' boomboxes lulled the girl to sleep nightly. This was quite preferable to other, more dangerous noise.
They ate dinner in the kitchen. A squirrel rustled at the window. The grandmother had made stuffed cabbage a real treat. The sour pleasure of the pickled cabbage expanded in their mouths. The parents talked of Munca, and she stared at the squirrel, who she and her brother called Sonia. The brown refrigerator hummed, and the toaster on the counter shined. What possessed her to make such a feast? The father asked. He smacked his lips and furrowed his brow. She must be in love. The Sarmala sat on a bed of mamaliga, polenta, and they poured buttermilk on the whole thing. But, thought the girl, wouldn't the grandmother already be in love with the grandfather? Who else would she love? They ate quietly for a while. Grandma loves Grandpa, said the girl, finally. She rubbed at her eye. The mother stared a moment at the girl, unaccustomed to outbursts. Of course she does, the mother said. Then a minute later she added, he just means she made the food too salty. The girl imagined the grandmother pouring salt in a big pot on the stove while staring dreamily at the moon. The girl shoveled more cabbage and beef and tomato into her mouth. A bit of smoked pork had gotten in, rendering the concoction divine. She didn't find it too salty. It was just right.
9. The father's mother was in a different school of thought when it came to sarmala. Less sauerkraut, more smoked pork, and more tightly bundled rolls, like rows of little soldiers. The mother's mother, and the mother's father for that matter, constructed looser rolls with more juice. Placement of this footnote should not be interpreted as a preference for either faction of sarmala making on the part of the narrator. The narrator will happily accept both forms.
After dinner, she and her brother turned the kitchen stools on their sides and sat astride them, riding magic broomsticks and rocket ships. They opened the window and threw peanuts at Sonia, who scampered on the blacktop and tried to get into the apartment. They slammed shut the window, squealing. The night air iced. The next morning, the grandmother returned in the dancing shoes. She wore a tweed skirt with maroon lines that pointed down to the shoes. Grandma, the girl said, tell me about the fox. The fox?
10. The girl also possessed an illustrated book of Aesop's fables in which a fox eyed a bunch of grapes lasciviously.
Fox trot. They sat at the table while the grandmother shelled peas. We used to dance it in Constanza, by the sea.
11. In ancient times, the city was Tomis, city of Ovid's exile.
Every weekend, the waltz and the tango too. My cousins were older than me and very beautiful, always with beautiful dresses. A pea skittered to the floor. The girl slipped off the stool to pick it up, her finger and thumb out like pincers. The princess and the pea.
12. During the Holocaust, the girl's other grandmother worked for a time in pea fields with her sisters. They ate yellow pea soup in which worms wriggled, but they covered up the worms with slices of bread, and she said it was pretty tasty and filling.
She would hide the pea beneath her mattress to determine if she herself were a princess. Now she imagined the cousins in pink flouncy dresses, frothing with white lace. They live in Israel now, said the girl. Some of them, yes. One of them, she hid a pair of diamond earrings in her cheeks, and when she got to Israel, she stepped off the boat and bought a house with them. Why did she hide them there? What if she swallowed them? The girl clutched her belly. It would surely cause a stomach ache, a sparkly sharp diamond glittering down her soft pink throat. In her hierarchy of aches, the belly was king. They were precious. She was careful. She didn't want anyone to take them away. It was all she had. Not even a husband she had.
13. It's questionable whether this grammatical construction accurately captures the grandmother's speech patterns. It may be over-reliant on popular notions of Ashkenazi Jews.
The girl wondered about that, about having nothing but a couple of diamonds. How did that happen, and who had given them to her in the first place? Perhaps a fairy godmother, and she nodded, wanting to ask who would be so mean as to take them away, but she had slid off her stool to hide the pea and retrieved her stuffed monkey, Zippy, from the bedroom. On the stove bubbled the soup, steaming up the kitchen window. The grandmother took a slice of rye bread out of her wax paper bag. She smeared butter on it, called the girl back in, and handed it to her. She was a beauty queen, my cousin. She was Miss Bucharest, 1938.
14. The grandmother's father had been a lawyer. After the Holocaust, he reluctantly helped his niece change her official birth date, rendering her 10 years younger. Magic.
I used to live in Israel, too. But I came here to be near you. The girl tore through the crust. She didn't like the crust. It was sharp, and her babysitter didn't make her eat the crust, cutting it off the Wonder Bread, but the grandmother insisted. The babysitter gave her toys, too. Barbie dolls. The parents, disappointed, tried to rectify the damage with an office girl Barbie, unfortunately dressed in a pink suit. A magenta sequin tube top hid beneath the blazer. Once the sequins were discovered, the respectable blazer receded into a dark corner of the toy cabinet.
15. That's what happens when you play with too many Barbie dolls, her father would say to her later, when on the way to his office in the Chelsea neighborhood of Manhattan, they'd pass women dressed only in lingerie and heels.
What was she like, Miss Bucharest? The grandmother stirred the soup and gazed a moment at its rising steam. Well, she had red hair.
15. When the girl encountered photographs of Rita Hayworth, she imagined her grandmother, cousin, thus.
She dyed it, and once a week she would lie in bed all day to get her beauty rest. Like a nap, the girl eyed her grandmother suspiciously. Yes, said the grandmother, tasting the broth with a slurp, just like a nap. The grandmother gave the salt 3 healthy shakes, a flurry of crystals dancing into the bubbling liquid. The parents went to Mexico, to Acapulco.
17. There's a Polaroid of the girl's parents sipping margaritas in a restaurant. A man dressed as a pirate presses a plastic machete to the father's throat while the father playfully sticks out his tongue. No longer a popular beach resort, Acapulco recently suffered a spate of violent crime. 5 severed heads were found in a public school in an attempt to extort teachers' salaries. Much later in life, the girl's brother would call Romanians the Mexicans of Europe due to similarities in immigration and deportation issues, although it should be noted that the brother is neither a sociologist nor a political scientist.
They hadn't yet had a honeymoon. The girl wanted to eat honeymoon. They laughed when she said this.
18. Though there is no mooncake in Romanian cuisine, it is a traditional Chinese pastry served during mid-autumn. The girl is very fond of red bean paste. Here's a recipe, courtesy of About.com. Sponsored link. The Bill Clinton diet. Learn about the diet that helped Clinton lose 25 pounds and get healthy. www.atasteofhealth.org. Drain and discard the water. Cover with fresh water and bring to a boil. Then simmer over low heat until skins open. Strain the beans and discard the skins.
The grandparents stayed over and slept in her parents' bed. She'd never seen her grandfather sleeping. Her grandfather was younger than her grandmother. He had a big pink head ringed with white and gray hair. One time, sitting in a rocking chair, he rolled up his sleeve and flexed his muscles for the girl. 3 big lumps, like Popeye.
19. At one time, early in life, the girl had been fond of spinach. She couldn't account for how it fell out of favor with her palate.
The grandfather chuckled at her astonishment. He picked up heavy boxes all day, boxes of security guard uniforms. He used office supplies to make her and her brother badges. She would stick them in her back pocket and flash them at invisible criminals. Grandpa, the girl said to the grandfather, "How come you don't have any hair?" "When I was a boy, I went camping in the woods," he said. "And then, while I was sleeping, a bear came and licked my head."
20. Carpathian brown bears, Ursus arctos, are an endangered species. Bear hunting is a currently lucrative subsector of the tourism industry of Romania. Under communism, however, bear hunting was restricted to the highest party officials.
That enormous tongue and all of her grandfather's hair. Was the bear's tongue sticky or sharp or both? The girl's tongue lolled out of her mouth. She let out a throaty roar. Rah. "Calming down," she said. "Tell me another story." "I was a small fry when I met Grandma, he said.
21. Her grandfather probably never used this term, small fry. In fact, the translator of his memoir may have insinuated it among her memoir.
There was a sad happiness in his voice. "At the cultural office." She didn't know what you do at the cultural office. She imagined typewriters and filing cabinets. He continued. "She didn't have to sit there all day. She took tourists on cruises on the Danube. They always ended in Vienna."
22. Upon the release of the film Dr. Zhivago, the grandmother snuck into a Viennese theater to watch what had been banned in Romania. At the theater, she ran into several of her traveling companions, each having tried to slink in without others catching wind of it. The grandmother did not share this nugget of a story until she was 90.
"I always missed her very much." Her grandfather liked to cook on the weekends. He would make meat pies and cheese pies with bread-like crust or with flaky phyllo dough. He experimented with pickling and gave her the first of the batch, intensely juicy and sour.
23. After retiring, the grandfather would continue experimentation in the kitchen. Noodles with coffee were one memorable failure. Tending garden became a more successful pastime. Inexplicably, the girl feared he would hurt the stray cats in the yard while using the hedge clippers, even though the grandfather is one of the sweetest, most gentle people in the entire world.
She was a strange little girl, liking sour things. After lunch, he gave her a Kit Kat. He gave her and her brother a Kit Kat every week. The grandmother had a cousin that lived in Queens. They spoke on the phone in German.
24. The grandmother and her cousins were born in the remnants of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. German was their first language. Having planned on sending her to the Sorbonne, the grandfather's father had gotten her French lessons, a popular language at the time, when Bucharest was Paris of the East. War interrupted her schooling at age 12, and she never went back. The grandmother also spoke a bit of Russian and some Hebrew.
Her cousin was the only one she spoke German with. The grandmother was careful to point out they spoke Hochdeutsch, not Yiddish.
25. The girl used to think this term, High German, was related to class. In fact, it is merely a geographic term, but perhaps the grandmother did see Yiddish as somehow not quite up to snuff. If this is the case, the grandmother would never admit it. 26. The girl's other grandmother spoke some Yiddish, also Hungarian, Romanian, and Russian. She said once that her own mother spoke a mishmash of Yiddish, Hungarian, and Romanian, but none of them very well. It was her mother that broke with orthodoxy, sneaking smoked pork into her family's pot of cholent baked in the kosher village oven.
The cousin had grown up in Vienna and had lived in London for 10 years before coming to New York. The cousin had made belts that were sold at Bloomingdale's. She drank her tea with milk. All this enchanted the girl. The cousin also made chicken schnitzel with mashed potatoes and trifle for dessert. Trifle was the best thing. Angel food cake and vanilla pudding and red jello and strawberries and whipped cream. The cousin always whipped it fresh herself. Frischka may have been the girl's favorite Romanian word. It mimicked the sound of cream spraying out of the ready-whipped can her parents used. "Allo, Anneline," her grandmother chirped into the kitchen telephone. The girl played in her bedroom as a whole other language, a whole other mystery, rumbled in the adjacent kitchen. Nestled inside a blue plastic box, among an arsenal of crayons and a tube of Elmer's glue, lay a pair of rounded point, plastic-handled scissors. The girl crept into the hall, glancing at her grandmother at the kitchen table with the U-shaped phone cord dangling in the air. She slipped across to the bathroom, where, perched on a step stool, she sometimes opened the medicine cabinet to rifle through its curiosities, to smear on her mother's rarely used makeup in thick clown warrior streaks. Mouth gently agape, the girl put the scissor to the soft pink U between her index finger and thumb. The dull blade caught on the flesh. A tiny slice, a seep of red. At first it didn't seem to hurt, only bleed. When she'd stumbled or had a scrape, it was the surprise that made her cry. At the doctor's office, she'd seen blood emerge from needle pricks at sensitive fingertips, but she'd hold her breath for a Band-Aid and a lollipop. She felt very calm now, yet somewhat disturbed that she'd done the cut herself. When her friend Louis had chased his older brother with a pipe he'd found in the yard and stumbled, accidentally cutting the soft part at the top of his cheek with the sharp rim of it, it looked as if a huge tear of blood were coming out of his eye, and he'd wailed and screamed as his mother put him in the station wagon and drove off to the hospital. Even through the closed windows of the car, she'd heard his rough, throaty cries. She brought her thumb up close to her hand, closing the slice. She didn't want huge globs of dark blood to come out, like with Louis. She didn't want to get in trouble, or wail, or scream, and she thought she might get in trouble, and now the little cut started to hurt a little, right where the skin opened, and she thought about not saying anything, because who would be so silly to slice their own hand like that, not on accident, but on purpose? But what if it didn't stop bleeding? What if the cut got bigger? She tested the cut by opening her hand, briefly, and it did seem bigger, so she quickly shut it again. She dropped the scissors in the sink and, trying not to stumble or cry, brought her hand, cradled in her other hand, to her grandmother. "What did you do?" the grandmother asked in a melodious double-octave croon, tongue clucking, long figure wagging, a despairing "ay, ay, ay" as she returned the phone to its cradle. After a smear of ointment, after the carefully applied Band-Aid, there was a spanking, the only spanking the girl ever got, for soon after, the parents read about a certain Dr. Spock, and everything became a discussion, or a timeout, or a compromise. Parenting concepts neither had been raised with, of course, concepts for a new generation in a new world. The girl didn't know why Ceausescu sounded Italian, like it should be the brand of a tomato sauce. It would probably have olives and peppers in it, two foods she despised. Her father had lived in Italy for 6 months before he came to the United States. He had eaten minestrone every day and had been an extra in a spaghetti western. Ceausescu seemed to be why everyone was here and not there.
28. Apparently, Gorbachev called Ceausescu the Romanian Führer. See Sebetian, Victor, 2009, Revolution 1989, The Fall of the Soviet Empire.
But the girl hadn't formed in her mind some separate idea of Romania. It was an abstraction. 12 dancing princesses made more sense to her. In her mind, she made their skirts whirl. Bolnav meant sick, but it felt better to say Bolnav than sick. Bolnav felt more like home in bed, drinking chamomile tea with honey and butter and Sesame Street at the disco.
29. See especially Milos Mikuki at the disco.
Sick meant a plastic chair and bright lights and the smell of rubbing alcohol and a waiting room full of screaming, beet-colored babies. The girl's mother took her to the doctor quite often for any swollen nose, pink eyes, sore throat, or fever, and her medical record, consisting of large index cards taped together, became thick as a Tolstoyan doorstop. Her doctor was a nice man from Timișoara that drove a BMW and lived on Staten Island. He'd been her great-grandmother's neighbor in Timișoara.
30. See Note 5 regarding the pushy older relative. 31. In a few years from the time of this story, Timișoara would see the beginning of the end of communism in Romania.
Ceausescu was sick, but not Bolnav, more in the head.
32. In Ceausescu's reign, the most important holiday of the year was his own birthday. Ceausescu introduced to the Romanian government a presidential king's scepter. Salvador Dali once sent him a note congratulating him on introducing such an invention, and the official party newspaper reprinted Dali's note without realizing its sarcasm.
"Your eyes must be falling into your mouths," the girl said to the children Friday night. They'd stayed up past their bedtime watching an expose about alien abductions. They'd sat on the floor in the dark, necks craned upward to the warm blue glow. She switched on the living room light. Time for bed. They brushed their teeth. She looked at her brother's cheeks, rosy-veined, the veins delicate, like the web of milk that sat on the surface of her father's coffee, left half-drunk in the fridge all day. Her thumb and pointer finger pressed together against the Band-Aid. She leaned against the cold of the washing machine and shivered. Wriggling into bed, the girl pulled her rainbow-bright comforter tightly around herself to make a cocoon. She wondered if the aliens disguised themselves as the Jetsons, if they were watching her now, waiting for the right moment to snatch her up. She squeezed the comforter more closely to herself. The mother turned out the lights, but, mercifully, she left open the door. "Watch this," her brother whispered from the upper bunk. The girl waited, rapt. She thought he would slip down from his bunk, nimble-footed, like a spy, like the Pink Panther. Finally, she said, "What? Watch what?" "Shh," said the mother from the hallway. "He's asleep." The girl scowled. The thought of real aliens excited her too much for sleep. She sat up in the cocoon and extracted one arm to get a small mirror hidden in a cubby near the bed. She flicked the mirror up and down to play with circles of light on the open bedroom door. A small pale spotlight danced on pony stickers she put there. The light slid on and off of them. Her father stalked inside, loomed in the doorway, snatched away the mirror, and returned to the kitchen, where the parents continued their murmuring. "Why did he do that?" she whined, leaning from the edge of her bunk into the hall. If she were very tall and bendy, she'd be able to stick her head in the kitchen while staying in her bunk. The girl's mother said, "Shh." The girl tried again in a whispery whine. "Why did he do that?" Whispered whines were more difficult. The mother returned to the doorway. "He was scared. He thought the light was from a robber. Go to sleep." The girl pouted herself to sleep, but hadn't fathomed that her father could ever be frightened.
33. Though the father had immigrated from Romania with his mother, brother, and grandmother by more traditional means, via the established relative, by the time the girl's mother was able to leave in 1975, he had to get her on a list of refugees that UN Ambassador Daniel Patrick Moynihan, subsequently Senator, Democratic, New York, had drawn up and sent to Romania in exchange for certain favors. The name Moynihan is understandably invoked with a certain muted reverence in the girl's household. The new Penn Station, to be constructed on the site of the Central Post Office in New York, will be named Moynihan Station. Political gridlock and financial constraints have slowed its progress.
The girl was Volnave. The girl dreamed of the pea, lumped beneath her, strong as stone. Honeydew light seeped out from under the mattress, and she slipped out of bed, rooting around until she found the shining pea and swallowed it. Her grandmother appeared in the bedroom, lit by the moon, and took off her red dancing shoes to give to the girl. The grandmother said that if she adjusted the straps, the shoes would fit her feet, magically. The grandmother's long toes, brown and wrinkled, twiddled on the orange bedroom carpet.
34. The girl and her brother vomited on this bristly carpet many times. One time, particularly active and dreaming, the girl rolled off the bottom bunk and pissed herself. No one knows exactly how the mother managed to clean that carpet.
The girl knelt to strap on the shoes, sparkling in the night. Instantly, she shot up in height, her nightgown blossoming around her into a pink and silver-spangled ball gown, just like the one worn by Glinda the Good Witch. The girl followed the grandmother as she padded barefoot down the stairs, which led not to Beverly Road, but a glittering canal. A dark blue gondola waited, barely visible in the water, its faintly gilded edges in the outline of a raindrop or an elongated eye. The girl boarded the gondola, and the masked man at its prow glanced over his caped shoulder and showed her half a grin, before pushing off and taking her to a red stone square, upon which danced the 12 princesses, shoes clopping in the night.
35. The girl's grandfather, the grandmother's husband, loved Dumas and read his novels in Romanian, French, and English, over and over again. The girl later wondered if his interest in the man in the iron mask had any connection with his adolescent imprisonment under the Iron Guard. The grandfather had, in fact, preferred the valor displayed in Three Musketeers to any of Dumas' other works.
A drizzle blurred faint lamplight in the square. The grandmother was nowhere to be found, slipped away from girlhood fantasy and into some memory of Vienna, or Bucharest, or Constanza, or perhaps the place of her childhood, the small provincial town of Vatradorne, where a marching band played weekly concerts in the town gazebo, before a backdrop of a placid lake and jagged, snowy mountains. Her stories were tight-lipped and elliptical, rarely about herself, always about her father or her cousins.
36. Her husband's memoir was posthumously edited, scrupulously.
The dancing princesses, perhaps to elude the rain, disappeared beyond the square, taking with them faint rustles of skirts, diminishing clip-clops. The girl followed the damp footprints up to the edge of the square, where she stopped at a wall of abrupt, inky darkness. Her band-aid, growing wet, dangled from her hand. She yanked it off, and, not finding a place for it, upturned a red stone, marked with the petite outline of a dancing shoe. She discarded the band-aid, pushed it deep into the sand beneath the stone, but in so digging, found 2 little lumps nestled there, and she brushed the grit away from them, uncovering a small pair of diamonds, and she let the rain wash them until they contained an incandescent sparkle. And, realizing there must be more treasures beneath these stones, she continued upturning them, tracing a winding path, finding beneath the stones wriggling grubs, or lost keys, or pressed flowers.
37. Suitable flora, chamomile, or linden, or lilac, or peony.
Or rabbit holes, the clack of stone upon stone reverberating through the square and into the wall of darkness at its edges.
Thanks, guys. That was really wonderful. So Morgan and I were going to have a little impromptu conversation with Anca, and also you guys can feel free to join in. Just going to be a few minutes. That was a really beautiful reading. So one question I had, adjust the mic here a little. You know, as someone who's read the story before and obviously is familiar with a lot of the footnotes, how did that play in choosing? I think some of the footnotes may have been edited a little bit, so how did you kind of work that out with deciding how they were read in order for performance, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So Kristen and I were practicing a little bit the other day, and just thinking about when you listen to the story, how the flow was different with the different footnotes. Whereas if you were simply reading it, I think it would be easier to go back and forth. But for the listening experience, we thought it was important to cut down certain footnotes to maintain the flow of the body of the story.
Moon pie recipe.
Especially the mooncake recipe, which is much longer in text form, and probably very difficult to listen to.
Well, the only thing that I thought, and this might be a little bit, I thought your story was lovely, but also the thing that it made me think about, the part that really caught my attention the most was when in one of the footnotes it mentions the narrator. So it like becomes, so the story is third person, and then you have a footnote which makes it another like level removed, right? Like I don't even know what they call that, right? It's like an extra third person. But then when the narrator breaks the fourth wall in the footnote, to me it just seemed like this extra sort of layer of like I just was like really I wasn't confused about who was talking or whatever, but I thought it was interesting because like in film you can't, it's always in third person, and I guess you could do first person, but it doesn't actually work, and in radio it's always first person. But in writing you can go through this like fourth or fifth person.
I like that. I think I'm going to start using that, fourth or fifth person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the footnotes, you know, were one narrator, an older version of the, you know, the more, I guess, idealized childish narrator of the body of the story. And then it was the process of writing the story was just so self-indulgent that I just kind of kept letting myself do whatever I wanted. So when I wanted to start talking about the narrator, I just went ahead and did that.
Yeah, I like that about it. And it was so, it was almost like as if, like at first I thought maybe that the footnotes were going to play out a parallel narrative, and then like as I'm reading, I'm realizing that they don't. Like they're sort of a lot more, if you're going to try to understand the character of the footnote person, it's not through a narrative. It's like more of a portrait or, you know, something like that. So I thought that was cool too, that I got to feel the push of a narrative in the main thing, but I got to also, and I also wondered if I was just reading it and not hearing it. Normally I read footnotes immediately, but maybe I might read through the one and then read the footnotes later, for this one especially.
Yeah, it was interesting thinking about when we would read the footnotes and then when we might repeat certain parts. You know, when you read a footnote and then you go back over the sentence and read it again so that you know, find the thread again.
Research to me seems really interesting with this particular story because it doesn't seem like there's any the way the narrative is flowing. It doesn't even seem like research has happened. Like it just seems like this like natural pulling of facts and information. I guess I'm curious for you as a writer, how much did research play a role in what you were doing with your narrative?
Well, it was very associative. So anytime I felt like there was something in the body of the story that was interesting in some way, whether it was going to contradict something or complicate it, I would research that. I would look it up, and I just sort of follow my curiosity with it, and that's kind of how the research came into play.
So did you know, like, did you already plan that the political aspects of the story were going to be there before you were writing, or did that kind of evolve as you were getting to know the characters kind of in this footnoted way?
It definitely evolved. I think at first the footnotes started as background research that weren't even going to be in the story, but then I just had so much fun with the going back and forth that I decided it had to be part of the story.
I don't actually have any other questions.
Does anyone in the audience have any questions? Well, thank you guys so much for coming, and thank you, Anca, for your story, and thank you, Morgan, for hosting us.
Yeah, thank you guys. Okay.